A story from the Talmud. There was once a worker who had completed a very large project for a certain homeowner. On the eve of Yom Kippur, the worker said to the homeowner, "Pay me my wages so I may go and feed my family." The homeowner said, "I have no money." The worker then asked for the wages in the form of land, but the homeowner said, "I have no land." Animals? None. Cushions and blankets? Nope. Exhausted, the worker left empty-handed. A few weeks later, after the festival of Sukkot, the homeowner took the worker's wages in hand, along with a burden of food and gifts that required 3 donkeys to carry, and went to the worker's home. After they ate and conversed, the homeowner finally paid the worker. The homeowner then asked the worker, "When I said I had no money, weren't you suspicious that I was trying to avoid paying you?" The worker answered, "I thought perhaps the opportunity to purchase inexpensive merchandise had presented itself, and you purchased it with the money you owed me, and therefore you had no money available." The homeowner said, "And when I said I had no land, weren't you suspicious?" And the worker answered, "I thought perhaps your land is leased to others, and you can't just kick them off." Animals? Perhaps the animals are hired to others. Cushions and blankets? Perhaps all your property was consecrated to heaven, and therefore you had nothing available at the moment. The homeowner then said to the worker, "I swear, that is actually the truth. I had no money available at the time because I had consecrated all that I owned to the temple. And when I came to the sages, they dissolved all my vows, and I immediately came here to pay you." As the homeowner departed, he left the worker with a blessing. "As you judged favorably, so may God judge you favorably." In this season of judgment, when we symbolically stand before God, our tradition reminds us, assume the best. We pray that God's attribute of mercy will outweigh God's attribute of strict judgment. And we pray that our attribute of mercy will outweigh our own strict judgment. And while the worker in this story takes it to an extreme, our sacred text repeatedly reminds us to give others the benefit of the doubt. In Pirkei Avot we read, "Do not judge your fellow until you have reached their place, and judge all people with the scale weighted in their favor." This afternoon we'll read from Leviticus 19, the holiness code, which contains some of our most important moral and ethical obligations, including what is often known as the golden rule, ve'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. This commandment is at the foundation of judging others favorably. Love your neighbor is about empathy, seeking to see ourselves in the other person. We want to be given the benefit of the doubt, right? We want to be shown mercy in this hour where our lives symbolically hang in the balance. And when we see ourselves in another person, we not only have a chance to cut them some slack, but we can also begin our own cheshbon hanefesh, our own accounting of our souls. The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, taught, "The world is a mirror. The faults you see in others are your own." Or, to put it in more contemporary language that hopefully a lot of you know, it's me. Hi, I'm the problem, it's me. Where are my Swifties at? You want to sing with me? At tea time, everybody agrees. I stare directly at the sun, but never in the mirror. It must be exhausting, always rooting for the anti-hero. For those that didn't know, that's Taylor Swift. I personally like Taylor's version more. But the Baal Shem Tov and Taylor Swift are essentially saying the exact same thing. The first step in our teshuvah is admitting that the faults we see in others might actually be our own. It can be difficult to see our own shortcomings, but it's essential if we want to grow as individuals. When we judge others, we're often projecting our own insecurities and fears. We may see in them things that we dislike about ourselves, but are often afraid to admit. When we see something we dislike in another, it's actually an opportunity to learn about ourselves. We can ask ourselves, why does this bother me so much? Is it because I have a similar flaw that I'm trying to hide from myself? Maybe the worker in our story had his own issues with paying bills, and he then had the empathy to not immediately assume the worst of the homeowner. Generally, we give ourselves the benefit of the doubt, but rarely do we extend that same level of consideration to others. A car just cut me off? Well, I immediately assume that person is selfish, unthoughtful jerk who thinks they're more important than everyone else on the road. A friend didn't text me back. I immediately assume they're not responding because they were offended by something I said. This one's hypothetical. My wife didn't do the dishes after they said they would. I immediately assume they're lazy and not sharing in the household responsibility. Just wait. When we fail to look in the mirror, when we fail to see our own faults in others, when we assume the best of ourselves but the worst of others, we fail to love our neighbor as ourself. To love my neighbor as myself, I need to cut them some slack, like I do for myself. Rabbi Elke Abrahamson, in a keynote address on the art of civil discourse, talks about the concept of motive asymmetry. Quote, the phenomenon of assuming that your ideology, your position, is based in love, but your opponent's ideology is based in hate. So often, we paint ourselves as the hero and the other as the villain, assuming their motives are nefarious while ours are pure and just. But we can never fully know what another person is thinking. To truly love your neighbor and to disavow this motive asymmetry requires humility. It requires us to begin from a position of curiosity rather than certainty. Loving your neighbor means having that humility to stand in your neighbor's place, to stand in their shoes. Loving our neighbor is believing that there is another perspective unknown to us. So what would happen if we were all a little more like that worker in the Talmud story, giving others the same benefit of the doubt? What would we need in order to reach this level of positive judgment? If we could just stop, take a moment of humility, and assume others are trying their best, bringing the same positive intentions as us, we might be able to look in the mirror and see the situation differently. A car just cut me off? Assume the best. They didn't notice me in their blind spot. And then look in the mirror. I've done that many times before. Maybe I should be more mindful when I'm driving, which is really hard when you have screaming kids in the back, by the way. A friend didn't text me back. Assume the best. They have a lot going on right now and just didn't see the message. And then look in the mirror. I've definitely forgotten to get back to people, and it doesn't feel great. I want to be more mindful this year when others reach out to me. My spouse didn't do the dishes after they said they would. Assume the best. They forgot. Maybe they were exhausted after spending hours doing bedtime with the children. Then look in the mirror. I'm the worst at doing chores. I never get them done when I say I will, and I need to make sure I'm doing my share as well. Imagine if both partners in a relationship assumed that they always needed to bring a little more than they did yesterday. When we lead with humility, when we realize we can't be perfect in our assessment of others, we might as well be generous. It's a more positive way to live, to not walk around huffing at people all the time, letting their mistakes bring us down. And then we go that step further. We look in the mirror and acknowledge that the faults we see in others may be our own. Only then can we begin to grow. Only then can we break free of this motive asymmetry. Only then can we love our neighbor as ourself. Now, as with most Jewish teachings, we also need balance in our approach to judging others. The 11th century sage Maimonides writes that judge every person favorably only applies to those we know to be righteous or to people whose character is unknown to us. If, however, we know that someone is wicked, Maimonides gives us permission to protect ourselves. In the case of the abuser, we do not need to assume the best. Yes, there is always room for teshuvah in Judaism. But our tradition makes clear that we do not need to search for the good in someone who intentionally and repeatedly hurts us. In that case, it's the abuser's responsibility to right the wrongs. Shortly after the start of the Me Too movement, in response to society repeatedly insisting that abusers who have contributed to society get a pass, Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg wrote, "Society can't make the determination about when a perpetrator has done sufficient teshuvah, and the people who stand to earn money from enabling their redemption can't make that determination either. No matter what, we don't need to reward them, these men who have done harm with more opportunities for wealth, prestige, power, and celebrity. Part of repenting is accepting the consequences of your actions. In this case, those consequences might come from the criminal justice system or from professional censure. We do not need to give them the benefit of the doubt. They've lost that privilege as a consequence of their actions. We reserve that generosity of spirit for others, for someone who hasn't yet proven themselves, or the people in our lives that are closest to us, those who have shown us their righteous character, but really get on our nerves sometimes. We need to give them the benefit of the doubt, assume the best, judge them favorably. When we shift our attention toward their strengths and away from their faults, they will also focus on those strengths. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav says, focus on the good. It is not incidental to your spiritual quest. It is vital. We spend most of this season of introspection focusing on our mistakes. But Rabbi Nachman reminds us we also need to search out the good in others and in ourselves. The Hebrew phrase for gratitude, hakarat hatov, literally means to notice or recognize the good, to see the best in someone or a situation, to assume the best. When we take time to cultivate gratitude for our loved ones, to tell them what we love and appreciate about them, we cultivate those same qualities in ourselves. A mirror reflects both the good and the bad. just as we see those faults in others because they're often our own. When we focus on the good in others, we can find that good in ourselves as well. So stare into that mirror. Love your neighbor as yourself. Assume the best. On this day of judgment and throughout our lives, as you judge favorably, may God judge you favorably. Gamar Chatima Tova. May we be sealed for good in the book of life. Good Yantif.